Wealthy husband kicks his wife and child out of the house. Years later, he regrets it when he sees her on TV. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. The air was thick with the heady scent of cigars, leather polish, and the faint hint of imported whiskey. Harold Thompson, CEO of Thompson Enterprises and one of the city's most sought-after business magnates, leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, surveying the room with a sense of total authority. To him, life was a calculated balance of power and control, where every individual served a purpose, including his own wife, Anna. Anna had been the perfect accessory in his world, a gentle beauty with an aura of mystery and creativity that his associates found endearing. It added to his charm that his wife had this subtle, artistic air, though he barely found any use for it. He had met her during a charity art event he sponsored, something for the benefit of public perception more than anything else. She had been a young, hopeful artist, bright-eyed and full of visions of a life where dreams mattered. But dreams, Harold believed, were indulgences. What mattered to him was reality. Money, power, and influence. Anna had held on to her dreams despite marrying him, and for a while, it amused him. Her little paintings, as he called them, the story ideas she kept in a tattered notebook, and the clutter of unfinished sketches that dotted their home were all evidence of her unwavering artistic ambitions. But as the years passed, Harold's amusement turned to impatience. How long would she continue this charade? On a cold October night, their argument erupted. Harold, fueled by frustration and a recent deal gone awry, tore into Anna with words that cut sharper than glass. "Do you even hear yourself, Anna?" he sneered, the gleam in his eyes cold and unfeeling. "You're nearly 40. At this point, that little fantasy of yours should have faded. When will you grow up? You think I don't notice the time you waste scribbling and painting things no one cares about?" Anna looked up at him, her face pale and lips pressed tightly together. "Harold, I'm not asking for your money. I'm just asking for support. A kind word now and then. I know my work may not make millions, but it fulfills me. Why can't that be enough for you?" His laughter filled the room, dark and condescending. "Fulfills you? Look around, Anna. This life, this house, everything you have is because of me. You're here because I allow it. Do you understand? I'm the one holding all of this together, while you're off playing artist. You wouldn't last a day without me." The words stung, each one laced with contempt and dismissal. He saw the hurt in her eyes, but in that moment he didn't care. He was Harold Thompson, and no one was going to tell him what to value. That night he crossed a line. As Anna stood there, silent and struggling to hold back tears, he delivered his final blow. "Get out, Anna. Take your ridiculous sketches and stories and go. If your art is so important, let it support you. Let's see how far your talent gets you in the real world." With those words, he turned away, confident she'd beg for forgiveness, plead for another chance. But she didn't. Instead, she packed her things, gathering her belongings with a quiet dignity that unsettled him. She took their young daughter, Claire, who had been sleeping upstairs, and left without a word. 4 days after she left, Harold waited for the phone call, the tearful apology, her acknowledgement that she needed him. But it never came. Weeks turned into months, and while he buried himself in work, he couldn't help but notice the quiet. It gnawed at him. His home felt emptier without Anna and Claire, and he found himself dwelling on memories of Anna's laughter, her excitement over a new book or painting, and the small joys she used to bring into the house. But pride prevented him from reaching out, and he convinced himself he was better off without her distractions. One evening, months later, he returned home from a charity gala, tossing his coat over the couch and sinking into his chair. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and flipped through the channels absent-mindedly, looking for something to distract him. That's when he saw her. On screen, under the bright lights of a bustling studio set, sat a woman he recognized but almost couldn't believe. Anna's hair was styled, her makeup delicate yet striking, and her eyes sparkled with a confidence he'd never seen before. She wore a rich emerald green dress that brought out her eyes, and her posture was graceful, exuding a quiet power that sent a jolt through him. The host introduced her as Anna Thompson, best-selling author of the novel Breaking Free. The title alone felt like a stab to his ego, as she smiled, radiating the confidence he once dismissed as naive. He found himself mesmerized. The camera zoomed in, and he noticed the details he had overlooked in all those years together. The sharp intelligence in her gaze, the delicate curve of her lips, the way she moved her hands expressively as she spoke. "Your novel Breaking Free is resonating with readers everywhere," the host was saying. "What inspired you to write such a raw, deeply personal story?" Anna looked down for a moment, smiling in a way that was both sad and resolute. "It's a story that's very close to my heart," she replied, her voice steady. "It's about a woman who finds herself trapped in a life that's not truly hers, in a world where her voice is ignored. Eventually, she has to make the hardest decision, to leave behind everything she's known and find her own path." Harold sat frozen, gripped by a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Was this story about him? Surely not. It had to be a coincidence. But the words she chose, the emotion behind them, and the subtle way she avoided his gaze all hinted otherwise. He continued to watch as Anna described her journey, a tale he once thought trivial, insignificant. The host leaned forward, eyes wide with intrigue. "There's a line in your book that's become quite famous," he said. "It's the moment where the protagonist realizes she was never truly valued, merely possessed. Can you tell us about the inspiration behind that?" Anna's expression grew serious. "That line? Well, it was one of the hardest to write. Came from a place of realization, a moment of truth. Sometimes, people are so blinded by their own power that they don't see what they have until it's gone." The interview continued, with Anna delving into parts of the book that resonated with audiences. Her descriptions of emotional entrapment, the longing for freedom, and the courage it took to step away from a life built on illusions. Each word sliced into Harold like a knife, each truth uncovering the painful reality of what he had done. Harold couldn't tear his eyes away from the screen. Every word Anna spoke felt like a revelation, yet it also held a certain familiarity that stirred memories he had long buried. He had dismissed her once, thinking of her ambitions as foolish, her voice as inconsequential. Now, that very voice was captivating a nation, and he felt as if each sentence she uttered was a carefully calculated strike against him. She was a vision on stage, seated across from the host, her presence both commanding and graceful. Her story had transformed her, brought out something he hadn't seen in her, something he never bothered to look for. The host's admiration was apparent, and Harold felt a sharp pang of jealousy as he watched them engage with each other. This was a side of Anna he had never known. "You've said before," the host continued, "that writing this book helped you come to terms with your past and heal. Could you elaborate on that for us?" Anna paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes we find ourselves in places where we feel small, silenced, even invisible. Writing helped me confront the parts of my life where I'd allowed myself to feel unworthy. It was a way of reclaiming my story, taking control over a narrative I'd lost in someone else's shadow." Harold's grip on his glass tightened, the weight of her words cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. He tried to convince himself it was just a publicity tactic, a way to sell more books. Yet as he watched her, the conviction in her eyes was undeniable, and a sense of dread started to creep into him. The interview ended, but Harold couldn't shake the effect of what he had just witnessed. Anna's face remained on the screen, her name now emblazoned beneath the title best-selling author. The credits rolled, but his mind raced, unable to accept the gravity of what he'd just seen. His ex-wife, the woman he had thrown out with nothing, had risen to a level he could hardly fathom, and she was achieving it through a story that had cast him as the antagonist. In the days that followed, he became obsessed with learning more about the book. He ordered a copy. He even considered sending someone else to buy it, too prideful to admit he'd stoop so low as to purchase his ex-wife's novel. When the book finally arrived, he found himself alone in his study, the thick leather-bound cover staring back at him like a taunt. The title Breaking Free was bold and unapologetic, a painful reminder of the journey she had taken since leaving him. He opened the first page and began reading, drawn in by the crisp, evocative language. Her writing was compelling, filled with the same quiet resilience he once ignored. Each page felt like a mirror held up to his worst traits. Anna's protagonist was a woman whose life had been consumed by someone else's ambitions, her desires minimized, her existence defined by another's terms. It was painfully familiar. Page by page, he was taken through a journey of despair, realization, and ultimately liberation. The scenes were hauntingly accurate, mirroring their life together so closely it felt as if she were peeling back his skin, exposing his own ugly truths to the world. He read about the controlling husband, a man of great power and influence but little empathy, whose arrogance blinded him to the pain he inflicted on those he loved. The narrative was brutal, unflinching, and it left him hollow. As he turned the final pages, he realized with dawning horror that Anna had not just survived without him. She had found her voice and her power because of his rejection. His dismissal of her dreams had forced her to confront her deepest fears and create something remarkable out of her pain. And now, the world saw him not as Harold Thompson, esteemed CEO, but as the unnamed villain in Anna's story. The book's popularity continued to skyrocket, and soon, he couldn't escape the whispers, the sidelong glances, the murmurings of those who wondered if he was that man. His colleagues gave him sympathetic but knowing looks, and social events that once boosted his confidence now felt like pits of quiet judgment. When he entered a room, he felt the weight of invisible eyes, as if everyone were waiting for him to show some hint of remorse, of guilt. One evening, while attending a high-profile fundraiser, he overheard two women discussing breaking free. "I heard the husband in the book was based on a real person," one woman whispered, leaning in to her friend. "Can you imagine someone treating their own wife that way? And she just survived, like a phoenix rising from the ashes." The other woman shook her head. "It's shocking. Men like that think their money and power mean they can get away with anything." Well, she showed him. "I read they're even planning a film adaptation. She'll be on every screen in America. I hope they cast a real monster to play her husband." Harold's heart sank. A film adaptation. The very idea filled him with dread. It meant the story would spread even further, immortalizing his sins in a way he couldn't control. Desperation clawed at him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He had spent his life controlling every aspect of his world, from his business to his relationships, yet here was a narrative beyond his grasp, reshaping his image into that of a despised character in a story he had once dismissed. Driven by a gnawing need to understand, he called up an old contact in the publishing world. The voice on the other end was warm and cordial, but when Harold introduced himself, there was a brief pause before the conversation continued. The subtle distance was unmistakable. Even here, Anna's story had made waves. "I'm curious," Harold said, forcing a casual tone, "about the success of breaking free. The story, it's powerful." The contact cleared his throat. "Yes, Anna Thompson's book has really resonated with people. It's rare to see a debut novel reach such heights so quickly. Readers seem to connect with her journey on a deeply emotional level. There's something about her transformation that speaks to anyone who's ever felt undervalued or unheard." Each word stung, and Harold couldn't help but feel the urge to defend himself, to protest the narrative Anna had woven. But he held back, too proud to reveal his wounded ego. As the conversation ended, he realized he was left with nothing but his own hollow empire, built on empty pride and a reputation that was now being questioned by everyone around him. Unable to bear the isolation, he attempted to reach out to her. It began with a letter, carefully crafted and phrased to show his regret. But Anna's response was brief and polite, devoid of any warmth or desire for reconciliation. She had moved on, he realized. She had found a world where he no longer held sway, where his wealth and power meant nothing. He tried again, hoping for a chance to explain, to apologize face to face. But each attempt was met with the same quiet indifference. Months passed, and as Breaking Free continued to dominate bestseller lists, Harold's desperation grew. The movie rights were sold, and soon the book he once mocked became one of the most anticipated films of the year. The public awaited the dramatization of Anna's story with bated breath, and Harold could feel his grip on his own life slipping with every passing day. One night, he sat alone in his lavish study, surrounded by the trappings of a life he had once valued above all else. The silence was unbearable, pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't shake. The shadows seemed darker, the room colder, as if the very walls were condemning him. He poured himself another glass of whiskey, but even the burn of the alcohol couldn't ease the ache gnawing at his insides. In a moment of weakness, he picked up the phone, dialing her number. It rang and rang, each tone a reminder of the distance he had created. Finally, her voicemail picked up, and he listened to her calm, clear voice asking callers to leave a message. His throat tightened, his carefully crafted words dissolving into silence. Harold listened to the voicemail, his mouth dry, heart pounding as if he'd run a marathon. His own message caught in his throat. What could he say to her that would matter now? After years of belittling her dreams, dismissing her worth, and finally casting her out, he realized there was no simple apology that could undo what he'd done. The silence of the line mocked him, each second a reminder of the opportunities he'd squandered to make amends, the kindnesses he'd withheld. He hung up without speaking, but he couldn't ignore the urge to see her, to somehow confront this new reality she'd forged without him. When he heard of an upcoming literary award ceremony where Anna would be the guest of honor, Harold arranged to attend, his ego and pride overridden by the gnawing need to understand what she'd become. He used his connections to secure a spot, fully aware that his appearance might attract some whispers. It didn't matter, he needed to see her. The evening arrived, the grand ballroom filled with the city's elite, journalists and publishers. Harold wore his finest suit, meticulously tailored, the kind of attire that once commanded admiration. But tonight, his confidence faltered, his usual assurance tinged with uncertainty. He scanned the crowd, searching for her, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Then he saw her. Anna stood across the room, surrounded by admirers and colleagues, her presence radiant and assured. She wore a deep blue gown that hugged her frame, elegant and striking, the color a sharp contrast to the vibrancy of her smile. She looked like a woman who belonged, a stark contrast to the quiet, unsure figure she had once been beside him. Her laughter floated through the room, filling the space with warmth that had always been absent in his carefully curated world. Harold wanted to approach her, but he froze. What could he say to her here, in the presence of all these people who adored her, admired her? The years of scorn and derision he had heaped upon her now felt like an unbearable weight around his neck. He was the intruder in this world she had built, the antagonist in her story, just as she had portrayed him. But he couldn't look away. He was trapped by his own need to face what he had lost. As the ceremony began, Harold took his seat near the back, unnoticed and anonymous, yet riveted by every word that was spoken. One by one, renowned authors and publishers took the stage to commend Anna, praising her work for its bravery, honesty, and transformative impact on readers. When Anna's name was called for her award, the room erupted in applause, and Harold felt a pang of envy and regret so deep it was almost physical. Anna stepped up to the podium, holding her award with grace. She looked over the audience, her eyes scanning the room before finally resting on him. Just for a moment, a flicker of recognition that passed as quickly as it came. Then she turned back to the crowd, her expression thoughtful, composed. "Thank you all," she began, her voice steady. "This journey has been challenging, to say the least. Writing Breaking Free wasn't just about telling a story. It was about claiming my own voice. For years, I didn't think I had one that mattered. But eventually, I realized that every voice matters, that we all deserve to tell our stories, especially those that hurt the most." The crowd was captivated, listening with rapt attention. But Harold felt her words resonate on a level that no one else could understand. She was speaking to him, telling him in no uncertain terms that he had been the one to stifle her voice, to make her feel insignificant. And now, she was using that voice to illuminate her truth, to draw strength from the very pain he had inflicted. Anna continued, a gentle smile on her lips. I'm often asked if the events in the book really happened, and the truth is they did. But breaking free isn't just about one woman's story. It's about anyone who's ever felt trapped, unseen, or unheard. I hope it encourages others to find their own strength, their own voice, and to remember that they are worthy of love, respect, and freedom. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation sweeping across the room as people rose to their feet. But Harold remained seated, his hands clenched together, his heart heavy with shame and remorse. In that moment, he saw the full impact of what he had done, how he had taken someone as vibrant and capable as Anna and tried to confine her to a life that was small, limiting, unworthy of her spirit. And now, she had broken free from it all, transforming her pain into a triumph that left him completely powerless. After the ceremony, Harold found himself unable to leave. He lingered in the shadows, watching as people congratulated Anna, as she signed books and posed for photos with adoring fans. She looked happier than he had ever seen her, a lightness in her expression that was completely unfamiliar to him. As the crowd began to thin, Harold gathered his courage and approached her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Anna," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She turned to him, her expression cool, composed. "Harold," she replied, nodding politely. There was no warmth in her gaze, no sign of the woman who had once loved him with unguarded affection. He swallowed, struggling to find the words. "Hey, I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you, for everything you've accomplished. It's incredible, truly." Anna looked at him for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. "Thank you, Harold. But I didn't do it for you." The words hit him like a slap, but he forced himself to continue. "I know I can't undo the past, Anna. I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But if there's anything I can do, anything at all." Anna's gaze softened slightly, but it held a note of finality. "Harold, I don't need anything from you. I never did. That's something I had to learn on my own." She paused, then added gently, "You taught me a valuable lesson, though. And for that I'm grateful." He searched her face, desperate to see some trace of the love they had once shared. But it was gone, replaced by something stronger, more resilient, a woman who had reclaimed her identity, her life without him. And he realized with a sinking heart that she had truly moved on, that there was no room for him in the world she had built. As she walked away, surrounded by admirers and friends, Harold felt an emptiness settle over him, a void that no amount of wealth or power could fill. He returned home to his grand, empty mansion, the silence more oppressive than ever. For the first time, he was forced to confront the life he had built, a life devoid of meaning, stripped of the one person who had ever truly seen him. The weeks that followed were a blur of self-reflection and hollow routine. He buried himself in work, throwing himself into deals and mergers, but nothing seemed to dull the ache of loss that gnawed at him. Everywhere he went, he saw reminders of Anna, billboards advertising the upcoming film adaptation of Breaking Free, magazine covers with her smiling face, interviews where she spoke with eloquence and grace about her journey. The film premiere arrived, and despite his reservations, he found himself watching it alone in his vast home theater. The adaptation was striking, raw, each scene a brutal reminder of the choices he'd made, the cruelty he had inflicted. As he watched the actor who portrayed him, cold, dismissive, powerful yet emotionally bankrupt, he felt a wave of self-loathing that was almost unbearable. In the final scene, the protagonist, now free and independent, stands on a stage, her face illuminated by a spotlight as she tells her story to an enraptured audience. The camera lingers on her expression, one of peace, strength, and liberation. The film ended, and Harold was left in the dark, his heart heavy with regret and a newfound understanding of what he had truly lost. He knew then that there was no going back. Anna had moved forward, claiming her own stage, her own life, while he remained shackled to the hollow empire he had built. She had become a symbol of resilience, of hope, of triumph over adversity. And he was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder of the price of arrogance and unchecked pride. For the rest of his days, Harold carried the weight of his choices, haunted by the knowledge that he had created his own downfall. Anna had broken free, and in doing so, she had claimed a life he could only watch from afar, a life that no longer had a place for him. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.